Have you ever wondered why the person for whom you sacrificed everything suddenly starts ignoring you one day as if you never existed? The one you considered your entire universe turns your very existence into a cold silence. When you scream, cry, or post sad stories on social media just to grab their attention, you think they will finally feel your pain. But is that true? Are they really seeing your agony? Psychology says that when you exhibit your weakness in front of someone, you aren't causing them any pain. On the contrary, you are merely feeding their ego. They know they can play with your emotions at the snap of their fingers whenever they want. Your tears only make their arrogance stronger. But will this game always go on like this? Or is there a way to flip this entire script? You think you are missing that person. You think the pain currently sitting in your chest is your true unrequited love for them. You feel you can't move on because that person was a part of your soul. But this is just an illusion. The truth is, your brain is playing a massive trick on you. You aren't attached to that person. Instead, you are trapped in a deep mental and neurological web that exists entirely within you. You aren't suffering because of their absence. Your nervous system is fighting a completely different battle. When scientists at Harvard Medical School researched the human brain, they discovered that being love-struck releases massive amounts of dopamine. This neurotransmitter activates the brain's reward circuit in a way that mimics an addiction to cocaine or alcohol. Meaning, on a psychological level, your love was nothing short of a severe dependency. And when that person suddenly leaves your life, your brain goes through a terrible state of withdrawal, a deficit state. The restlessness you feel after a breakup is not a lack of love. It is that exact dopamine deficit your brain is desperately clawing to fulfill. This is exactly why you repeatedly check their social media accounts. You watch their last active status. You sift through old pictures. Researchers at NTU Singapore proved in a 2025 study that social media platforms exploit this exact dopamine system. Every time you view their profile, your brain gets a momentary, tiny reward. It is exactly like a gambler pulling the lever of a slot machine. This habit doesn't bring you closure. It keeps your brain continuously chained to the addiction. Alongside this, another hormone is at work within your nervous system, oxytocin. This is the chemical responsible for creating feelings of security, calmness, and trust in long-term relationships. When this bond is abruptly severed, according to British psychologist John Bowlby's attachment theory, your nervous system does not interpret it as a simple ending. It experiences it as a massive threat to its own safety. Your nervous system protests with everything it has, attempting to re-establish that broken bond. But the biggest reason you stay stuck is hidden inside the Zeigarnik effect. This psychological principle states that our minds easily forget completed tasks, but ruminate on incomplete stories, unfulfilled promises, and unresolved questions 24 hours a day. When a relationship ends abruptly without a proper conversation, the mind begins treating that lack of closure like a puzzle it must solve. You spend all day analyzing what went wrong, and this rumination, this obsessive thinking, keeps you bound to the exact same spot for years. Now look at this game from a completely different perspective. What if I told you that you were never actually hating or loving that person? In reality, all this anger and agony isn't meant for them at all. You are attached to the future you envisioned with them in your imagination. You are trapped in the hope trap, which repeatedly whispers to you that maybe tomorrow everything will fix itself. This hope appears positive on the surface, but according to psychology, it is the single greatest enemy of your healing. You aren't chasing that person. You are trying to reclaim the self-worth that was lost when they walked away. You are starving for their validation. You want them to say just once that you mattered to them, simply so your ego can find peace. Only then will you realize that in this entire tragedy, you didn't just lose a person. The deep pain isn't about them no longer being with you. The profound agony is that with their departure, you lost your identity. When you're in a relationship, you slowly disconnect from your friends, your support system, and your own hobbies. Your entire existence shrinks to revolve around that one individual. And when that center is suddenly removed, you no longer know who you are outside of them. This battle was never about getting that person back. It was always about reclaiming your lost certainty, your emotional safety, and that old smiling version of yourself that you handed over at someone else's feet. So what is the psychological solution to break free from this labyrinth? What is the method that will change the direction of this entire game? The direct psychological remedy is conditioned inhibition. According to addiction research, when you are exposed to a cue of your addiction but actively restrain yourself from reacting, your brain's dopamine response drops below its baseline over time. This means you must strictly enforce the no contact rule in your life. This does not mean blocking them out of anger or posting quotes to show your resentment. The real psychological strike is absolute silence. When they try to create any ripples in your life, whether through a message or a subtle hint, your reaction must be non-existent. When your mind remains entirely calm, unpredictable, and indifferent, the other person's ego naturally begins to crack. Withdraw your energy from that person and channel it entirely into your own growth. When you begin to transform yourself physically, mentally, and professionally, it isn't just an external makeover. It is a new version of you, one that is no longer dependent on anyone's reply. If this psychological truth has shaken something deep inside you, leave just one sentence in the comments below. I am not who I used to be. This sentence is not for anyone else. It is a new directive to your own brain that the game has officially changed. And if there is a friend in your life who is still destroying themselves today, trapped in this neurochemical web, make sure this profound insight reaches them. Silent authority always stands with you in your quiet struggles. But before you leave, ask yourself one final psychological question. If this entire agony, this anger, and this pain were never truly about that person, if this entire battle has always been about your own mind, your lost identity, and reclaiming your self-worth, then why are you still waiting for them to return? Do you know the psychological game your mind plays against you the moment you try to distance yourself from that person's social media? You tell yourself, I won't check their profile today. You make a solemn promise. You even slide your phone far across the room. But as the hours slowly tick away, an uncomfortable, suffocating restlessness begins to claw at your chest. Your hand absent-mindedly reaches for the phone. A seductive voice echoes in your mind. Just one last look to see if they are online. What's the harm in checking if they look happy or sad without me? And the very second you open their profile, a wave of profound relief washes over you. Even if you see a picture that triggers fresh agony, the overwhelming anxiety that was torturing you a moment ago instantly quiets down for a brief second. In the realm of psychology, this is known as intermittent reinforcement. It is the exact neurobiological mechanism that turns humans into compulsive gamblers. When a gambler pulls the lever of a slot machine, they don't get a reward every single time. They win sometimes and they lose most times. This toxic game of maybe is what triggers a catastrophic dopamine storm inside the brain. In its final days, your relationship had degenerated into a slot machine. That person would shower you with affection one day, only to plunge you into a freezing, weeks-long silent treatment the next. This absolute unpredictability conditioned your brain to become a literal slave to their behavior. Now, even after the breakup, your brain is hopelessly wandering around, hunting for that same maybe. You aren't chasing love. You are chasing a variable reward schedule that has turned you into a psychological prisoner. But the most dangerous phase of this game begins when you start romanticizing this mental slavery as true love. You comfort yourself with the delusion that suffering endlessly for someone is the hallmark of a pure, cinematic lover. You think to yourself, I love them from the depths of my soul, and that is why I am weeping today. They are cold-hearted because they can smile while I drown. By doing this, you willingly step into the comforting role of the victim. You extract a twisted sense of validation from believing you are the ultimate martyr of this story. You parade your tears before your friends, and more dangerously, before your own reflection. You listen to devastating melancholic songs designed to bleed your wounds deeper. You stay up until the dead of night reading old text threads, acting like a starving traveler sitting on the banks of a dried-up river in the middle of a desert, begging for water from the sand. But stop for a moment and look at this with icy clinical detachment. Is this actually loyalty? Or is it a brilliant excuse your mind invented to run away from the terrifying responsibility of healing? Psychology reveals that the hardest thing for a human being to accept is their own foolishness and their own illusions. When you claim you cannot move on because your love was too pure, you are merely handing your brain a protective shield. You are desperately trying to avoid facing the brutal, humiliating truth. That person did not value you. They threw you out of their life like a piece of absolute garbage. The sheer narcissistic injury and trauma your ego suffers from accepting this reality is so immense that your brain creates a beautiful, tragic script. I am not weak. I am just a loyal soul who loves deeply. This endless mourning over an unfinished story is an unprocessed grief response, a psychological defense mechanism keeping you safe from the violent slap of reality. When scientists at the Pacific Neuroscience Institute monitored the brain activity of individuals trapped in the wreckage of a single breakup for years, they uncovered a terrifying reality. In long-term, intimate relationships, the human brain doesn't just run on temporary dopamine spikes. A much more powerful grounding chemical dominates the landscape: vasopressin. The primary function of vasopressin is to construct a permanent neurological territory, a deep-seated sense of attachment. It convinces your primal brain that this specific human being is your absolute circle of safety. The moment that circle is violently shattered, the anterior cingulate cortex, the precise region of your brain that processes actual physical pain, flares up aggressively. This is why a heartbreak doesn't just feel like a wave of sad thoughts. It manifests as a literal, crushing physical sensation in your chest. It feels as though a massive concrete slab has been placed on your sternum, making it excruciatingly difficult to draw a full breath. Yet you see some people walk away from this wreckage completely unscathed in a matter of weeks. You watch in horror as your exact same ex, who once claimed they would literally die without you, appears all over social media smiling, laughing, and holding hands with someone else just a month later. You are paralyzed with shock. You wonder, was it all a lie? Did they ever love me at all? This is where the darker side of John Bowlby's attachment theory takes center stage. Individuals who possess an avoidant attachment style are master escape artists when it comes to emotional pain. When a relationship collapses, their brain completely suppresses the trauma instead of processing it, burying it deep into the subconscious. They immediately jump into new social circles, go to wild parties, and display a flawless facade that screams indifference. You look at them and believe they are completely healed, but psychology labels this as a dangerous illusion, a false reorganization of the self. They haven't healed. They are simply running for their lives from their own shadow. Conversely, those with an anxious attachment style, which is likely what you are experiencing, absorb the entire blast of the trauma. They pitch a tent inside the radioactive debris of the broken relationship and weep 24/7. Both extremes are dysfunctional. One is running away from the fire, while the other is voluntarily burning themselves alive inside it. So where does this agonizing cycle end? When does the curtain finally fall on this game? True liberation only occurs when you systematically rip out and destroy the single greatest lie society has ever sold you: the myth of closure. You waste months, sometimes years of your life, waiting for that magical day when they will suddenly show up at your doorstep, look deep into your eyes, and deliver a poetic, tearful apology. You convince yourself that once they explain exactly why they did what they did, your soul will finally know peace. You beg for one last meeting, one final phone call, just to get some answers. But closure is nothing more than a giant psychological mirage. Human history proves that a broken person has never once found peace through the answers of the person who broke them. If they look at you and say they found someone better, your ego will be completely crushed. If they tell you the relationship failed because of your flaws, you will drown in a sea of self-hatred and guilt. And if they give you a vague, diplomatic excuse, your obsessed mind will spend the next 6 months spinning elaborate conspiracy theories to decode the hidden meaning behind their words. Psychology dictates that closure is never granted by the person who left. It must be aggressively manufactured within yourself. As long as you look to them for answers, you are handing them the remote control to your nervous system. They can press a button and make you calm, or press another and make you hyperventilate. Do you truly want to leave the steering wheel of your precious, irreplaceable life in the hands of someone who couldn't even care for your emotions when they had them? The time has officially arrived to execute the most lethal psychological strategy known to neuroscience: conditioned inhibition. This is the fundamental law of brain plasticity that can systematically starve and kill even the most severe addictions at their very roots. When a severe alcoholic decides to get clean, the greatest threat to their sobriety isn't the alcohol itself. It is the specific bars, the old drinking buddies, and the heavy glasses that trigger the memory of the substance. In cognitive psychology, these are called cues. As long as these environmental cues remain in front of the eyes, the brain will continue to scream for its dopamine hit. The true hidden purpose of the no-contact rule is not to punish your ex or make them miss you. The purpose is to completely starve the specific neural pathways in your brain that are hardwired to their memory. When you make an unbreakable pact with yourself that even if the earth splits wide open, you will not look at their profile, you will not utter their name, and you will not ask a single mutual friend about their life, you are cutting off the oxygen supply to those neurons. Your brain is forced to accept a terrifying but liberating reality. That stimulus no longer exists in your world. The first 15 days will feel like absolute hell. It will feel as though someone is physically ripping the life force out of your body. But it is an absolute law of psychology that if a conditioned habit is completely deprived of any feedback, validation, or triggers for 21 to 45 consecutive days, the neurons begin to untangle and break their connection. That howling agony, which feels like an immovable mountain today, will inevitably cool down into a silent, harmless pile of ash. But remember this carefully. Silence does not mean merely sitting in a quiet room. True power is achieved when you birth a silent authority within your own soul. The next time you wake up at 5 a.m. and your very first thought instinctively drifts toward them, stop your brain right there. Force yourself out of bed, push your physical body to its absolute limits, go to the gym, run until your lungs burn, or open a highly complex, difficult book that demands every ounce of your cognitive energy. The moment you convert your self-growth into an absolute, unyielding obsession, your self-worth skyrockets to a level where, when you look down, that person appears microscopic. Picture this exact cinematic moment. Months or perhaps a year from today, you're walking down a crowded street and suddenly, out of nowhere, that person appears right in front of you. They look into your eyes, fully expecting to see that same old, pathetic, broken individual who used to beg for their attention. But when their eyes lock onto yours, they find absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even a flicker of resentment. Just a deep, terrifying, oceanic indifference. They realize with a sickening feeling in their stomach that their presence or absence no longer alters your heart rate by a single beat. That is the exact second the entire game is flipped forever. Your absolute indifference will inflict a narcissistic wound upon their ego that no amount of validation can ever cure. They will spend the rest of their days haunted by the maddening question of how someone who once lived and breathed for a single text message became a vast, immovable mountain that doesn't even register their existence. This story was never about a tragic, unrequited love. This story has always been about reclaiming your stolen crown. If this deep psychological narrative has shattered the very last illusion keeping you chained, type one powerful phrase in the comments below before you turn off this screen. The game is mine. As your fingers physically press those keys, your subconscious mind will receive a brand new, non-negotiable directive. The season of weeping is officially over. The era of your empire has begun. And if you have a friend who is currently sitting in a dark, suffocating room, destroying themselves over someone who doesn't care, make sure this voice reaches their ears. Silent authority stands as an armor for those who remain silent before the world, but are quietly building an empire within. But before you step into this absolute power, force yourself to answer one final, uncomfortable psychological question. If you are sitting there right now, harboring a tiny secret hope that by executing all these steps, that person will finally suffer and crawl back to you. If this entire transformation is just an elaborate act to get revenge and show them what they lost, then are you truly breaking free, or are you just finding a more sophisticated way to remain a prisoner inside their cage?